The Galactic Council chamber was the largest structure ever built in known space. It floated in the void between star systems, a massive ring of metal and light that had witnessed 10,000 years of history. Inside the main hall, representatives from 300 species sat in their designated sections. Some breathed oxygen, others methane, and some needed no atmosphere at all. The technology that kept them all alive in one space was older than human civilization. Ambassador Vexthor of the Zentari Collective stood at the center podium. His blue skin reflected the holographic displays that surrounded him. He had requested this emergency session 3 days ago, and now every council member waited to hear what the humans had said. The Zentari were known as the galaxy's best diplomats. If anyone could make the stubborn humans see reason, it would be Vexthor. He activated the message crystal. The air above the podium shimmered and formed into the image of a human male. He wore a dark blue uniform with silver insignia on his shoulders. His hair was short and black, his eyes were brown, and his face showed no emotion. Behind him, through a viewport, the blue and white sphere of Earth rotated slowly. The human spoke clearly, and his words were translated instantly into 300 languages. His name appeared in the display. Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. He was not a diplomat. He was a soldier. That fact alone made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Jake Morrison's message was brief. The Galactic Council had sent demands to humanity 6 months ago. Humanity was ordered to surrender 30% of all colony worlds to Council administration. Humanity was ordered to reduce its military fleet by 70%. Humanity was ordered to pay an annual tribute equal to 15% of its total economic output. These were standard terms. Every species that joined the galactic community accepted them. It was the price of peace and protection. Jake Morrison said no. He did not explain. He did not negotiate. He did not ask for different terms. He simply stated that humanity rejected all demands and considered the matter closed. Then he said something that would be repeated across the galaxy for years to come. He said that any council ships entering human space without permission would be turned away. If they refused to leave, they would be removed by force. Then the message ended. The council chamber erupted into chaos. The noise was deafening even through the translation systems. High Chancellor Mordek, leader of the council for the past 2 centuries, slammed his staff against the floor. The sound rang out like a thunderclap and the chamber fell silent. Mordek was a Dravian, a species that looked like massive reptiles standing upright. His scales were deep red and his eyes were yellow. He had led the council through wars and peace treaties. He had never in all his years heard a species simply say no. Mordek's voice was cold and sharp. He asked Vexthor if this was truly humanity's final answer. The ambassador's skin turned a darker shade of blue, a sign of distress among his people. He confirmed that he had personally delivered the council's terms to Earth. He had met with their leaders. He had explained the benefits of joining the galactic community. He had warned them of the consequences of refusal. The humans had listened politely, then asked him to leave their space. 3 days later, they sent this message. Trade Minister Plix spoke next. Plix was a Geltharian, a species that looked like living liquid contained in a transparent membrane. Their voice bubbled and popped through the translator. Plix wanted to know how this was possible. The humans were newcomers. They had only developed faster than light travel 70 years ago. They had only 12 colony worlds. Their technology was primitive compared to most council species. How could they possibly think they could refuse? Commander Zal then rose from his seat. The Vorath commander was nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick armor plating that was part of his biology. The Vorath had served as the council's military arm for 5,000 years. They were the reason species accepted council terms. Zaldan's voice rumbled like distant thunder. He said the answer was simple. The humans did not understand their position. They needed to be educated. He volunteered to take a fleet to human space and demonstrate the council's power. Once the humans saw what they faced, they would beg to accept the original terms. But Ambassador Tevana of the Luminar stood and asked for permission to speak. The Luminar were beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells. They glowed with soft light and communicated through pulses of color as much as sound. Tevana had studied humanity more than most. She had read their literature and watched their entertainment. She had tried to understand how they thought. She warned the council that the humans might not respond as expected. Their history was filled with examples of them fighting against impossible odds. They had a cultural tendency to resist authority, especially authority they did not choose. Mordek dismissed her concerns. He had heard similar things about other species. Every primitive culture thought they were special. Every newcomer believed they could challenge the established order. All of them learned the same lesson. The Council had maintained peace for 10 millennia precisely because it did not tolerate defiance. He gave Commander Zal then permission to assemble a fleet. It would be a standard enforcement action. 3,000 ships should be more than sufficient. They would jump into human space, demonstrate their power, and accept humanity's surrender. It would take a week at most, the Council voted. 240 species approved the military action. 30 species abstained. 20 species voted against it, mostly younger members who still remembered their own enforcement actions. The vote passed easily. Zal then bowed to the Council and left to prepare his fleet. Vexthor remained at the podium, his skin now pale blue. He had spent months learning about humans. He had walked on Earth and spoken with their leaders. Something about this felt wrong to him, but he could not explain why. The Council had made its decision. In the viewing gallery above the main chamber, a small group of observers watched the proceedings. They represented species who were not yet Council members, worlds still considering whether to join. Among them was a young Kreshta scholar named Tikcha. The Kreshta were insectoid with multiple limbs and compound eyes. Tikcha had been studying galactic politics for her entire adult life. She turned to her companion, an elderly scholar from her homeworld. She asked if he thought the humans would surrender when they saw the fleet. The old scholar's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. He said that depended on whether the humans were wise or foolish. Then he added that in his experience, newcomer species were rarely wise. They had to learn through pain. 3 weeks later, Commander Zalthan's fleet assembled at the rally point outside human space. 5,000 ships had volunteered to join, making it one of the largest fleets in Council history. Species wanted to be part of teaching the humans their place. The fleet was a sight that had made hundreds of worlds surrender without firing a shot. It stretched across thousands of kilometers of space, a wall of metal and firepower that represented the might of 300 civilizations. Zal then stood on the bridge of his flagship and gave the order. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading for Earth. They expected to arrive, make their demonstration, and return home within days. None of them knew they were about to start the biggest crisis in galactic history. The massive Council fleet emerged from hyperspace near Jupiter's orbit. 5,000 warships appeared in a carefully coordinated pattern that had been practiced for centuries. Each ship took its assigned position in the formation. The largest vessels formed the center. Their weapons pointed toward the inner solar system. Smaller ships spread out in wings that stretched for thousands of kilometers. It was a display meant to inspire awe and fear in equal measure. Commander Zal then stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The massive view screen showed Earth as a small blue dot in the distance. He felt satisfaction. This would be over quickly. His communications officer began broadcasting on all frequencies. The message was simple. Humanity had 72 hours to accept Council terms. All human military vessels were to power down their weapons and prepare for inspection. All human leaders were to present themselves for formal surrender ceremonies. Failure to comply would result in orbital bombardment of military installations. The message repeated in 15 different human languages. Zal then had learned that humans still used multiple languages, a sign of their primitive nature. Advanced species had unified communication systems. The sensor officer reported that human vessels were being detected throughout the solar system, small craft near Mars, defense platforms around Earth, a few larger ships near the Moon. The total count was less than 300 vessels. Zalthan's tactical display showed them clearly. They were laughably outnumbered. He ordered his fleet to advance slowly toward Earth. The movement would give the humans time to see what they faced and make the intelligent choice. No one wanted unnecessary bloodshed. The Council preferred peaceful submissions. Then everything changed in an instant. The sensor officer's voice rose in pitch as alarms began screaming across every ship in the fleet. Thousands of new contacts appeared on sensors. They came from here at once, behind asteroids, from the shadow of Jupiter's moons, from positions that should have been empty space. Human ships materialized as if conjured by magic. They were not small patrol craft. They were warships, each one bristling with weapons. The tactical display showed Zaldan the impossible truth. The humans had more ships than his fleet. They had been hiding in his sensor blind spots. They had waited until his formation was fully committed. Now they had him surrounded. The human ships opened fire without warning. No demands, no final chance to surrender, just weapons fire. Zaldan barely had time to order evasive maneuvers before the first impact struck his shields. But these were not energy weapons like civilized species used. These were solid projectiles, chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. They hammered into shields with kinetic force that made the entire ship shake. His chief engineer reported that the shields were draining faster than expected. These primitive weapons somehow bypassed the energy dispersion systems that made Council shields so effective against lasers and plasma. The shields were designed to spread energy across their surface. Kinetic impacts concentrated all their force on single points. The shields failed in sections, and metal slugs tore through armor plating like it was paper. The battle became chaos. Human ships moved in ways that should not have been possible. They accelerated and turned faster than Council vessels. They used no predictable attack patterns. Council military doctrine was based on formations and coordinated strikes. Individual ships had specific roles and followed predetermined tactics. The humans ignored all of it. Their ships acted independently, each captain making split-second decisions. They were like a swarm of insects, impossible to predict or counter. Zaldan's fleet tried to return fire, but the humans were never where the targeting systems expected them to be. On the bridge of the Terran battleship Defiance, Admiral Lisa Hayes watched the battle unfold with calm efficiency. Her short blonde hair was pulled back and her green eyes tracked multiple displays at once. She had prepared for this moment for 6 months. Every simulation, every training exercise, every tactical meeting had been focused on this single question. How does a smaller fleet defeat a larger one? The answer was simple. Never fight fair. Use every advantage. Know your enemy better than they know themselves. Make them fight on your terms, not theirs. Lieutenant Peter Grant called out status reports from his station. The Council fleet was breaking formation. Their larger ships were trying to create defensive clusters. Their smaller vessels were attempting to screen for the capital ships. It was exactly what the simulations predicted. Council tactics had not changed in 1,000 years. They were effective against species who fought the same way. They were useless against an enemy who refused to follow the rules. Lisa ordered her ships to focus fire on the support vessels. Take out the screens and the big ships became vulnerable. Deny them their formation and they become targets. The battle lasted 2 hours. In that time, the Council fleet lost over 1,000 ships. Another 500 were damaged too badly to continue fighting. The Eternal Dominion took 17 direct hits. One missile punched through the bridge armor and killed 6 of Zaldan's officers. He himself was injured when a support beam collapsed. His right arm hung uselessly at his side. Emergency systems were failing across the ship. Power fluctuated. Life support was compromised in 3 sections. And still the humans kept firing. They showed no mercy. They gave no quarter. They fought like demons. Zaldan gave the order to retreat. It was the first time in 500 years that a Council fleet had withdrawn from battle. The surviving ships jumped back into hyperspace in a disorganized rush. Some captains did not wait for their slower vessels. Ships jumped alone rather than in formation. It was a complete rout. The proud Council armada fled in terror from the primitive humans. On his damaged flagship, Zaldan watched Earth disappear from his view screen. He had underestimated them. They all had. This would change everything. Back in the solar system, human ships began recovery operations. Lieutenant Peter Grant reported multiple distress signals from damaged Council vessels. Some were drifting without power. Others had life support failures. He asked Admiral Lisa Hayes if they should render assistance. It was standard procedure. Even enemies helped each other in space. The void was dangerous enough without adding cruelty. But Lisa was silent for a long moment. She looked at the tactical display showing the debris field. Thousands of pieces of destroyed ships. Most of them were Council vessels, but not all. 43 human ships had been destroyed. Over 2,000 crew members dead. They had families. They had lives. They died defending their home from invaders. Lisa's voice was quiet but firm. She told Peter no. They would not help. The Council came here to conquer Earth. They came with threats and ultimatums. They opened fire on human ships defending their own system. Let them face the consequences of their choices. Let them drift in the dark. Let them send distress signals that no one would answer. Let them remember what it costs to threaten humanity. Her officers looked uncomfortable, but no one argued. They understood her reasoning even if they did not like it. War was not supposed to be comfortable. It was supposed to be terrible. Terrible enough that people think twice before starting one. The council ships that could still move limped away. Those that could not remained behind, their crews hoping for rescue that would not come from humans. Some council species had biological advantages. They could survive in vacuum for hours. Others could hibernate to conserve oxygen. A few could eat almost anything, even their own dead if necessary. They would survive until their own people came for them. But they would never forget being abandoned in enemy space. They would carry that memory forever. The message was clear. Humanity would defend itself. Humanity would not be conquered. And humanity would not show mercy to those who threatened their home. This was the message that Admiral Lisa Hayes wanted the galaxy to receive. Come in peace and humans would welcome you. Come in war and humans would destroy you. There would be no middle ground. No negotiations under threat. No surrender to overwhelming force. Just defiance and victory or death. The Council wanted to teach humanity its place in the galaxy. Instead, humanity had just taught the Council a lesson it would never forget. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began in complete silence. Every representative was present either physically or through hologram. The massive chamber felt different now. The confidence that usually filled this space had been replaced with something else. Fear, confusion, anger. High Chancellor Mordek stood at the central podium looking older than his 400 years. His red scales had lost some of their luster. His yellow eyes scanned the assembly with visible frustration. The news from human space had reached every corner of the galaxy within days. A Council enforcement fleet had been defeated. Not just defeated, destroyed. The greatest military power in known space had been humiliated by a species that barely understood hyperspace technology. Commander, Zal then appeared via hologram from his medical bay. His right arm was in a regeneration sleeve. Bandages covered half his face. He had refused to delay his report until he healed. The Council needed to know what happened. His voice was steady, but everyone could hear the shock underneath. He described the battle in detail. The humans had been waiting for them. They knew exactly where the Council fleet would emerge from hyperspace. They had positioned their ships perfectly. They used weapons that Council shields were not designed to stop. They fought with tactics that no database could predict. They showed no mercy and accepted no surrender attempts. When the battle turned against them, they did not negotiate. They just killed more efficiently. Scientist Kelthvar of the Nexian Directorate presented her analysis next. The Nexians were known as the smartest species in the galaxy. Their 4 eyes could see in multiple spectrums and their brains processed information faster than most computers. Kelthvar had spent the past week analyzing every piece of data from the battle. Her conclusion was disturbing. Human technology was not superior to Council technology. In most ways, it was inferior. Their ships were slower in hyperspace. Their computers were less advanced. Their materials were weaker, but they had advantages that the Council had never considered important. Their weapons were simple and brutal. Their tactics were chaotic and unpredictable. Their crews were trained to operate independently without constant communication. Most disturbing of all, they had somehow hidden thousands of ships from Council sensors. Kelthavar believed they had discovered a new form of stealth technology, based on principles the Council had dismissed as impossible decades ago. Trade Minister Plix spoke next. The gelatinous beings' form rippled with agitation as they presented economic data. 17 species had already withdrawn their trade agreements with the Council. They claimed it was temporary due to increased piracy concerns, but everyone knew the truth. They were afraid. If the Council could not protect them from the humans, what good was Council membership? Plix reported that insurance rates for shipping through Council space had tripled. Several major trade routes were being abandoned. The economic damage was already in the billions and growing daily. Some species were even sending secret diplomatic messages to Earth. They wanted to open talks with humanity directly, without Council involvement. This was unprecedented. Council members did not conduct independent foreign policy. That was the entire point of the Council. Ambassador Vexthor requested permission to speak. His blue skin was almost gray now. He looked like he had not slept since the battle. He reminded the council that he had warned them about humanity. He had spent months on Earth talking to their leaders and studying their culture. He had tried to explain that humans were different. They did not think like other species. They had evolved as persistence hunters. They did not give up when facing stronger opponents. They found ways to win through endurance and creativity. Their entire history was filled with examples of small groups defeating larger enemies. They had a word for it in their military doctrine: asymmetric warfare. They specialized in fighting enemies they could not match directly. The council had given them exactly the kind of fight they were best at. Vexthor suggested that perhaps the council had approached this situation incorrectly. Perhaps threats and demands were not the right strategy with humans. This statement caused an immediate uproar. Species began shouting at each other across the chamber. The translation system struggled to keep up with hundreds of voices arguing simultaneously. Council members accused each other of cowardice. Some said the solution was to send a bigger fleet. Others insisted that economic sanctions would work better than military force. A few brave voices suggested that maybe the council should actually negotiate with the humans instead of demanding their surrender. These voices were shouted down by the majority. The council did not negotiate with primitives. The council maintained order through strength. Any sign of weakness would encourage other species to rebel. High Chancellor Mordek slammed his staff down repeatedly until the chamber quieted. His voice was cold and hard. He understood the concerns being raised. He acknowledged the military defeat. But he insisted that the fundamental situation had not changed. The council represented 300 species and controlled thousands of worlds. Humanity had 12 colonies and a fraction of the council's industrial capacity. Yes, they had won one battle through trickery and surprise, but they could not sustain a long war. The council would assemble a new fleet, this time 10,000 ships. This time they would not underestimate the enemy. This time there would be no mercy and no survivors. Earth would be reduced to rubble as an example to any other species considering defiance. Ambassador Tevana of the Luminar stood then. Her crystalline form glowed brighter than usual, a sign of strong emotion among her people. She asked the Chancellor if he had actually listened to anything that was said today. The humans did not fight like other species. They did not surrender when facing impossible odds. Sending a bigger fleet would just result in a bigger defeat. She had studied human history extensively. They had a saying: the harder you push, the harder they push back. They thrived on adversity. They became more dangerous when cornered. The council was making the exact same mistake that countless human enemies had made throughout their history, treating them like a normal opponent instead of recognizing what made them unique. Tevana continued speaking despite the angry murmurs from other delegates. She pointed out that no one had actually asked the important question. Why did the humans reject council terms in the first place? The terms were standard. Every species accepted them eventually. So what made humans different? She had a theory. Humans had developed space travel on their own. They had not been discovered by a more advanced species. They had not been given technology. They had earned every advancement through their own work. They felt no debt to the galactic community because they had never asked to join it. From the human perspective, the council was just another empire trying to conquer them, and humans had a very long history of fighting empires. They had fought their own empires. They had fought each other's empires. They had even fought against their own governments when they felt those governments became too controlling. Independence was not just a political concept for humans. It was part of their cultural identity. Trying to force them to submit was like trying to force water to flow uphill. It went against their fundamental nature. The chamber fell silent as the representatives absorbed this. Finally, a young delegate from the Kreshta hive spoke up. The insectoid's voice was translated with difficulty since her species communicated partially through pheromones. She asked what Tevana was suggesting. That the council just give up? Let the humans do whatever they wanted? Allow them to ignore galactic law? If the council backed down now, how many other species would follow the human example? The entire structure of galactic civilization could collapse. 10,000 years of peace and order could end because one stubborn species refused to follow the rules everyone else accepted. Tevana's glow softened to a gentle pulse. She was not suggesting surrender. She was suggesting that maybe the rules needed to change. The council had maintained order through a simple system. Might makes right. Join us or be destroyed. Pay tribute or be invaded. For 10,000 years this worked because every species the Council encountered was either too weak to resist or too afraid to try. The humans were neither weak nor afraid. They had exposed a fundamental flaw in the Council system. What happens when a species is strong enough to resist but not strong enough to defeat the Council entirely? The current situation was unsustainable. The Council could not conquer the humans without massive losses, but the humans could not expand beyond their current territory without fighting the Council. Both sides were locked in a stalemate. The only way forward was to find a new approach, an approach that had not been tried in millennia. Actually talking to the humans as equals instead of subjects. The secure bunker beneath Geneva had been built during the last World War, back when humans only fought each other. Now it served as the meeting place for the Terran Council, the group of leaders who made decisions for all of humanity. The room was simple compared to the grand alien structures humans had seen. Gray walls, a long table, comfortable chairs, screens showing data and maps. President Alan Carter sat at the head of the table looking tired. He had not slept properly in weeks. The weight of leading humanity through its first interstellar war was showing on his face. Around the table sat military commanders, intelligence directors, and civilian advisors. Each one looked equally exhausted. Director Sophie Blake of Terran Intelligence spoke first. She was a short woman with dark hair and sharp eyes that never stopped moving. Her job was to know everything happening in the galaxy. Right now, that job was nearly impossible. The Galactic Council was in chaos. Their deep space monitoring network had detected at least 20 species pulling back from Council space. Some were repositioning fleets to defend their home worlds. Others were opening secret communication channels with Earth. A few had even sent encrypted messages offering intelligence about Council military capabilities. The Council was fracturing and everyone wanted to be on the winning side. Or at least not on the losing side. General Marcus Webb cleared his throat. He was a large man with gray hair and a scar across his left cheek from an accident during flight training decades ago. He commanded all Terran military forces, and right now those forces were stretched to their absolute limit. He told the group something they already knew but needed to hear again. The victory over the Council fleet had been impressive. It had shocked the galaxy and bought Earth time. But it was also the peak of human military capability. They had used every ship they had, every pilot, every missile, every trick. There was nothing left in reserve. If the Council sent another fleet right now, Earth would fall. They simply did not have the resources to fight again so soon. Secretary of Defense Claire Morgan added more bad news. She was responsible for Earth's industrial capacity and logistics. The numbers were not good. Factories were running 24 hours a day producing ships and weapons. Raw materials were being extracted from asteroid mines at unsustainable rates. The economy was under severe strain. Civilian production had been cut to minimum levels. People were accepting shortages of basic goods because everything was going to the war effort. This could continue for maybe another year. After that, the system would collapse. They could not maintain this level of military readiness indefinitely. Something had to change. President Carter rubbed his eyes and asked the question everyone was thinking. What were their actual options? They could not surrender. The Council terms were unacceptable. Giving up 30% of their colonies meant abandoning millions of people. Dismantling their fleet meant leaving Earth defenseless. Paying tribute meant becoming a subject species forever. But they also could not win a prolonged war. The Council had too many ships, too many worlds, too much industry. Even if humanity won every battle, they would eventually run out of resources. So what was the third option? Dr. Henry Cross spoke up for the first time. He was humanity's leading expert on alien cultures and psychology. He had spent his entire career studying the few alien species humans had encountered before the Council. Now he was trying to understand 300 species at once. He was a thin man with messy brown hair and glasses he refused to replace with surgery. He always said he thought better with glasses. His analysis was both encouraging and disturbing. The Council, he explained, was not actually a unified government. It was more like a very old club with very strict rules. Most member species did not love the Council. They simply accepted it because the alternative was isolation or conquest. The Council maintained order through fear and habit. Fear of their military power. Habit because things had always been this way. But humanity had broken both of those pillars. The military power was no longer unbeatable, and the habit of automatic compliance had been shattered. Now species were asking questions they had not asked in centuries. Why do we follow these rules? Who benefits from this system? What if there was another way? Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hill, the youngest person at the table, asked what that meant for humanity's strategy. She coordinated communications between civilian and military leadership. She was good at translating between the different ways soldiers and politicians thought. Dr. Cross explained that humanity had accidentally started a revolution. Not a military revolution, a philosophical one. For 10,000 years, the galaxy had operated under one basic principle: might makes right. The strong rule and the weak obey. Every species accepted this because they thought it was the only option. Humanity proved it was not. By refusing to submit, humans had shown that resistance was possible. By winning the battle, humans had shown that the Council could be defeated. Now other species were wondering if they could do the same. The Council's real problem was not humanity's military. It was humanity's example. Director Blake leaned forward with interest. She asked if that meant they should be encouraging other species to rebel against the Council. Dr. Cross shook his head immediately. That would be too obvious and too dangerous. The Council would unite against a common threat. Instead, humanity needed to offer something the galaxy had never seen before: an alternative to the Council system. A way for species to cooperate without submission, equal partnerships instead of tribute and control. If humanity could create that alternative and make it attractive, species would leave the Council voluntarily. The Council would collapse from within rather than from external pressure. General Webb asked the practical question. How does Earth create an alternative galactic government when Earth can barely defend itself? They did not have the ships to protect other species. They did not have the economy to fund a new alliance. They barely had enough resources to survive. Dr. Cross admitted he did not have all the answers. But he knew humanity had one advantage the Council did not. Humans understood cooperation between equals. Human history was filled with alliances, treaties, and partnerships between independent nations. Sometimes those partnerships failed, but sometimes they created something stronger than any single nation could be alone. The European Union, the United Nations, the African Coalition, the Pacific Alliance. Humans knew how to work together without one side dominating the other. That knowledge was more valuable than any weapon. Admiral Lisa Hayes joined the meeting via secure video link from her flagship. She had been listening to the discussion while managing fleet operations. Her face on the screen looked thoughtful. She pointed out that they were missing something obvious. The Council kept trying to contact Earth. Multiple times per day they broadcast messages demanding negotiations. Earth had been ignoring them. But what if that was a mistake? Not because Earth should accept Council terms, but because silence gave the Council too much freedom to control the narrative. Right now the galaxy only knew what the Council told them about humanity: that humans were dangerous primitives who attacked without provocation, that humans threatened galactic peace, that humans needed to be controlled for everyone's safety. Earth had not told its own story, had not explained why they refused Council terms, had not offered their vision for how species could interact differently. President Carter sat up straighter. This was the first idea that felt like progress. He asked what Admiral Hayes was suggesting. She explained that humanity needed to break its silence, not to negotiate with the Council, but to speak directly to the galaxy, explain human values, explain why submission was unacceptable, explain what humanity wanted instead, make it clear that Earth was not trying to conquer anyone. Earth just wanted to be left alone to grow at its own pace, and if other species wanted the same thing, humanity would stand with them, not as rulers, as partners. This message needed to reach every species in the galaxy, bypass the Council entirely and speak to the people. The room fell silent as everyone considered this. Finally, Secretary Morgan asked how they would even deliver such a message. The Council controlled most communication networks. They would block any transmission from Earth. Dr. Cross smiled for the first time in the meeting. He said they would not use Council networks. They would use the same method humans had used for centuries when facing censorship. They would smuggle it. Use the independent traders and merchants who moved between systems. Use the species who were already questioning the Council. Use the information black market that existed in every civilization. The message would spread slowly at first, but once it started spreading, it would be impossible to stop. Ideas were more contagious than any virus, and the idea that species could be free and safe at the same time was very contagious indeed. President Carter looked around the table. He saw tired faces, worried faces, but also determined faces. Everyone in this room had accepted that they might die defending Earth. But now they had something more than just defense. They had a plan, a long shot, a gamble that might fail spectacularly, but it was better than just waiting for the next council fleet to arrive. He asked for a vote. Should humanity break its silence and speak to the galaxy? Every hand went up. The decision was unanimous. Earth would tell its story. The council had tried to make humanity a cautionary tale about the price of defiance. Instead, humanity would make itself an inspiration for anyone tired of bowing to the strong. The revolution Dr. Cross mentioned was about to become intentional, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months passed in a strange silence. The Galactic Council continued to exist, but its authority was crumbling. High Chancellor Mordek issued orders that fewer species obeyed. Trade routes shifted as merchants avoided council patrols. Tax collection fell as worlds claimed economic hardship. The council tried twice more to send military forces into human space. Both times, Terran defense fleet ships appeared in overwhelming numbers and forced the council vessels to retreat without firing a shot. The truth was that many of those human ships were empty hulls with minimal crews, just enough to make them appear operational on sensors. But the council did not know that. They saw what looked like an endless supply of human warships, and their resolve weakened further. The message from Earth had spread across the galaxy exactly as Dr. Cross predicted. Small data packets copied and shared through thousands of networks. Independent traders carried it between systems. Species translated it into their own languages and added their own commentary. Some agreed with it. Some dismissed it as human propaganda, but everyone talked about it. The message was simple. President Alan Carter spoke directly to the camera in plain language that translation software handled easily. He explained that humans did not want war. They did not want to conquer or control other species. They simply wanted the freedom to grow and develop at their own pace. They rejected council authority not out of disrespect, but because they believed that free people should not bow to distant powers they did not choose. He invited any species who felt the same way to open dialogue with Earth, not as subjects, not as vassals, but as equals working together for mutual benefit. The message ended with a human saying that resonated across cultures. United we stand, divided we fall. The response was beyond anything Earth's leaders expected. 37 species sent secret diplomatic communications to Earth. They ranged from small colonies to established civilizations. Each one had grievances against the council. Some resented the taxes. Others hated the restrictions on their military forces. A few had territories they wanted to reclaim from council administration. But all of them shared one thing. They were tired of being told what to do by species who lived thousands of light years away and had no understanding of local conditions. They wanted change, but they were afraid to act alone. If Earth could provide leadership for a new alliance, they would consider joining. The Terran Council met again in the same bunker beneath Geneva. This time the mood was different. There was hope mixed with the exhaustion. President Carter reviewed the diplomatic messages with his advisors. Secretary Morgan pointed out the obvious problem. Earth barely had enough resources to defend itself. How could they possibly protect 36 other species from council retaliation? General Webb agreed. The military situation had not improved. They were still running on fumes, using clever deployments to hide their actual weakness. If the council called their bluff and committed to a real assault, Earth would have maybe 2 weeks before defenses collapsed. But Director Blake had different information. Her intelligence network had picked up something interesting. The council was not preparing for a massive assault. They were preparing for a collapse. Internal communications showed species arguing about whether to continue supporting council operations. Some wanted to negotiate with the rebels. Others wanted to abandon the council entirely and focus on their own territories. The council's military arm, the Vorath, were split between those loyal to Commander Zaldan who wanted revenge against humanity and those who thought the whole war was a mistake. The economic strain was enormous. Council worlds were paying for a military buildup while losing trade revenue. Popular opinion was turning against the leadership in several key systems. The council was losing its war even though no major battles had been fought in months. Dr. Cross proposed a bold idea. What if Earth did not try to protect the rebel species militarily, What if instead they created a defensive pact where each species contributed to collective security? Humans had the tactical knowledge and combat experience. Other species had resources Earth lacked. Some had advanced sensor technology. Others had industrial capacity. A few had unique weapon systems. If they combined their strengths and shared their advantages, they could create a defensive network stronger than any single member. It would be genuine cooperation, not the Council system of tribute and control. Each species would maintain independence but agree to mutual defense. An attack on one would be considered an attack on all. Admiral Hayes, attending in person this time, liked the concept but worried about implementation. Getting 36 different species to agree on anything would be nearly impossible. They had different cultures, different values, different strategic priorities. Some were natural enemies who had been at war before the Council forced peace between them. How do you build trust between species who barely understand each other? Dr. Cross acknowledged the difficulty, but pointed out that humanity had managed similar challenges. The United Nations had brought together nations with centuries of conflict. It was not perfect, but it worked well enough to prevent another world war. The key was finding common ground. In this case, the common ground was simple. Everyone wanted freedom from Council control. Lieutenant Commander Hill suggested they start small. Invite the most committed rebel species to a conference. Not on Earth where humans would seem to be in charge. Not on any species' homeworld where others might feel disadvantaged. Instead, build a neutral space station specifically for this purpose. A place where all species met as equals. Design it so no single species had home advantage. Make it a symbol of the new way of doing things. If the conference succeeded and they could draft a basic agreement, others would join. If it failed, they would have lost nothing but time. President Carter made the decision. Earth would invite the rebel species to a conference to discuss forming what they were calling the Alliance of Free Worlds. The name was deliberately chosen to contrast with the Galactic Council. One emphasized freedom, the other emphasized control. Earth would provide the initial meeting location and security, but the alliance itself would be governed by consensus. No single species would have veto power. Decisions would require majority agreement, and most importantly, any species could leave at any time without penalty. This last point was crucial. It meant trust rather than force held the alliance together. The invitations went out through secure channels. 29 species accepted immediately. 5 asked for more time to consider. 3 declined politely, saying they could not risk Council retaliation. Earth began construction of the conference station in neutral space between systems. It was built quickly using modular designs. The architecture incorporated elements from multiple species' aesthetics. Meeting rooms were designed to accommodate different atmospheric requirements. Translation systems were tested extensively. Security was tight but not oppressive. The goal was to make every species feel welcome and safe. 3 months after the invitations went out, the first Alliance conference began. Representatives from 29 species gathered in the main assembly hall. Some appeared in person, others attended via hologram due to biological incompatibility. President Carter opened the conference with brief remarks. He thanked everyone for coming. He acknowledged the risks they were taking. He emphasized that Earth sought no special position in this alliance. Humans were just one species among many, all seeking the same thing, the freedom to determine their own futures. The conference lasted 2 weeks. There were arguments and disagreements. Species had different ideas about how the alliance should function. Some wanted a strong central authority. Others insisted on minimal structure. Military commanders debated defensive strategies. Economists argued about trade policies. Diplomats negotiated treaty language word by word, but slowly, painfully, a framework emerged. The Alliance Charter took shape. It established basic principles: mutual defense, free trade between members, respect for sovereignty, peaceful resolution of disputes, and the right of any member to leave without punishment. On the final day, 29 species signed the Alliance Charter. Humans did not sign first. That honor went to the Luminar, represented by Ambassador Tevana, who had been advocating for this approach from the beginning. Her crystalline form glowed with satisfaction as she pressed her mark into the digital document. One by one, other species added their signatures. President Carter signed for humanity, his hand steady despite the weight of the moment. This was not the end of anything. It was a beginning. A small group of species choosing a different path. The news reached the Galactic Council within hours. High Chancellor Mordek called an emergency session, but this time something was different. When he demanded that the council take action against the rebels, fewer than half the species voted to support him. The others abstained or voted against military action. Some even announced they were withdrawing from the council to join the alliance. Within a month, 63 species had signed the alliance charter. The council still existed, but its authority was gone. The old order was finished. 3 years later, Ambassador Tevana stood in the Alliance Assembly Hall addressing representatives from over 100 species. The alliance had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. It was not perfect. Members still argued. Trade disputes arose. A few minor conflicts had to be mediated, but no species tried to dominate the others. No fleet was sent to enforce compliance. The alliance worked because its members wanted it to work. She spoke about the early days when everything seemed impossible. She spoke about humanity's role in showing the galaxy there was another way. She ended with a human phrase that had become popular across Alliance space. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is no. Earth had said no to the Council's demands. That simple refusal changed everything. Now hundreds of worlds were free to chart their own course among the stars. And it all started because one stubborn species refused to bow.